So next up, podcast listeners, we have COVID-19. Are you essential? So once again, COVID-19, are you essential? What does that mean? Well, it seems that there are some jobs in America and some professions that are more important than others, right? So at the beginning of the pandemic, it is certainly understandable, and I want to put this out there first and foremost. At the beginning of the pandemic, we really didn't know what we're dealing with. So since we didn't know what we're dealing with completely, it made sense that we said, hey, look, we want to be really cautious and safe. And there are jobs that are extremely important, like working in the hospitals, of course, and public safety jobs, critically important jobs, without question. But now, months and months and months later, we still have massive lockdowns and the desire to lock down even more in where? Blue cities. What a surprise. More and more lockdowns, and the lockdowns are getting more ridiculous, and they're also getting more extreme. And also, I think, very dangerous, and quite frankly, I think incredibly scary. And so we're calling this COVID-19, are you essential? Well, I think everybody's essential. I've always thought that. I know you do too. And by essential, I mean your job, your life. We're all essential. We're all equal. But for whatever reason, we are this far in the pandemic, and we have in New York and Los Angeles and other places across the country, lockdowns getting more extreme. So there was an interview with Governor DeSantis of Florida on Tucker Carlson, and Governor DeSantis said it better than anyone about who's essential. We have that clip, and here it is.
And my view is that everybody's essential. Who is government to say that your job is not essential? I think it is essential. I think some of the stuff in March and April didn't work. I think you have to let people earn a living, and it's really not even government's role to say who could pick and choose. So we want everyone to have gainful employment. We want businesses to be able to operate, and I think that that's a better approach in terms of understanding that the virus is a problem. We need to deal with it, but you also have to deal with all of society.
You have to deal with all of society, right? You have to be reasonable, but you have to also understand that this far into the pandemic, there are other consequences of the lockdowns. And we all know that, and we've heard this ad nauseum on all the different media outlets. But what is fundamentally important is that we understand that never again should we let government convince us, and we need to stop government right now from trying to convince us that some people just aren't important. They're just not essential. I think that's ridiculous, and DeSantis said it best, and here's why this is important. What happens if one day there's an even more serious pandemic or a more serious issue that comes forth, or an issue that's completely manufactured, thus resulting in government saying, hey, remember that time there was a pandemic? Well, we can just go down and follow that same playbook about who's essential and who's not essential. Why? Well, here's an example. There's an article that just came out. It's an opinion article nonetheless. But these articles are finding their way into the mainstream media. What a surprise. This article's in MarketWatch. It's a commonly read magazine about, of course, Wall Street and the markets. Why it's there? Who knows? But it tells you how insidious this is. It's an opinion piece, and it's entitled, "We Need to Act Boldly Now If We Are to Avoid Economy-Wide Lockdowns to Halt Climate Change." I'm going to read this, part of this. It says, "We are approaching a tipping point on climate change when protecting the future of civilization will require dramatic interventions." And it's written by, let's see here, Mariana Mazzucato, okay? So Mariana writes as follows. As COVID-19 spread earlier this year, governments introduced lockdowns in order to prevent a public health emergency from spinning out of control. In the near future, the world may need to resort to lockdowns again, this time to tackle a climate emergency. Shifting Arctic ice, raging wildfires in the western U.S. states and elsewhere, and methane leaks in the North Sea are all warning signs that we are approaching a tipping point on climate change, when protecting the future of civilization will require dramatic interventions. Under a climate lockdown, governments would limit private vehicle use, ban consumption of red meat, and impose extreme energy-saving measures, while fossil fuel companies would have to stop drilling. To avoid such a scenario, we must overhaul our economic structure, and do capitalism differently. So there you have one of really hundreds of articles that are finding themselves at opinion pieces, that are finding themselves in mainstream media, and they're doing so advocating the fact that we should have lockdowns in the future and maybe even continue the lockdown that we have now because of other emergencies that are unrelated to the pandemic, such as climate change. And what do you think government would do then when they say who is essential and who's not essential? Let me think. All government officials would be essential, and everybody else wouldn't be essential, except for people with, billions of dollars and lots of money. They'd be essential because they'd buy their way into that essential club. And this is what is so scary about this particular time in American history. Are you essential? And I think we need to fight back as a people and say, yeah, we're all essential. We've had enough of the lockdowns, okay? We understand the risks that are at hand. We agree that, high-end masks make sense to wear if we are concerned about ourselves, and if we're really concerned about others, we will wear, these masks when we are indoors, but not outdoors. I'm sorry, I don't agree with wearing masks outdoors. I don't think that makes any sense. But nonetheless, this is where all this is headed. And we did a podcast recently about Barack Obama talking about getting rid of the Electoral College. This is all interrelated, ladies and gentlemen. It's all interrelated. All right? And I'm going to explain why, about why this whole are you essential thing and future lockdowns and what they mean for our freedom and why Barack Obama wants to get rid of the Electoral College. And he talked about it recently on The Breakfast Club with Charlemagne the God. We had that clip, and here it is.
So I wonder how different would the Dem strategy be if we lived in a one-man, one-vote society with no electoral college?
Well, I think that would help. I mean, look, let's take a simple example like the Senate. So Wyoming, which has about 500,000 people, has the same number of senators as California with 33 million people, right? Mm-hmm. So what that means is that the U.S. Senate basically is hugely skewed towards some of these lower population, more rural, much whiter states than the big coastal states.
So there you have Barack Obama saying it the way it is. He wants to get rid of the Electoral College because he thinks the people in Wyoming aren't essential, right? They're not essential. He thinks the people in Montana aren't essential because those are small states. And those are really, states where just aren't a lot of people there and they don't matter. So how's this interrelated with are you essential and lockdowns? Well, because if there's no Electoral College, then the people on the coasts, these large population centers, they're going to dictate what happens in your state in places like Wyoming and small states in the interior part of the country. By small, I mean smaller populations, relatively speaking, to, let's say, New York or California, right? Or Illinois. We all know that. So it also matters because, and here's an example, the mayor of Los Angeles, right? The mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, he just did this 2 days ago. He's banning unnecessary walking in Los Angeles. He's banning unnecessary walking in Los Angeles under the guise of lockdowns and COVID-19. So are you essential? No, you're not essential. Therefore, you can no longer walk outside in your community because it has been banned and it's unnecessary. And therefore, with getting rid of the Electoral College, as Obama suggested, follow me on this now, you get rid of the Electoral College, and then you're going to have people like Mayor Eric Garcetti dictating what happens in Wyoming. Of course you are, because you no longer have protections, right? You have the mob in charge. The mob is in charge, and it's the mob in Los Angeles, and it's the mob in New York City. And by mob, I'm talking about the vast, large group of people who decide, yeah, let's make sure they have to do it too, because it's not fair that we have to do it, you know? Well, here's an idea if you live in Los Angeles. Flip the bird to Mayor Eric Garcetti. I mean, that's what you should be doing. Say, Mr. Mayor, you're telling me that I can't walk outside unnecessarily? Who do you think you are? I mean, what kind of country do we live in? What kind of country do we want to live in? So this is just an example of what would happen, of course, in the future. First, we talked about, well, how about a climate lockdown? Well, do you think for 1 Minute podcast listeners that if Barack Obama got his way, if he got his way through Joe Biden naturally, because that's obviously Obama's dream, is that Joe Biden becomes the president-elect and then the president, Obama wants to see the Electoral College go away. And if that happens, do you think for 1 minute that Barack Obama wouldn't say, guys, let's do a climate lockdown. Let's do a complete and utter takeover. Because after all, the American people are starting to get used to this stuff, right? We've got a mayor in Los Angeles that's banning unnecessary walking. So, we don't want extra carbon outside. That would be terrible. That would be really bad for the environment. What more can they take away from you? Well, they can't take away anything from you unless you let them do it. And I got to tell you something. This is the first time I can say this in my lifetime that I've seen so many Americans, not all Americans, okay, but so many Americans willing to just blindly listen to politicians who say, follow the science, stay inside. Follow the science, you can't go walking. Follow the science, you have to wear a mask outside, all right? I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't wear a mask outside, but if you don't want to wear a mask outside, you shouldn't have to. If you want to wear a mask and you should wear a mask, by the way, if you go inside someone else's place of business, okay, fine. If you're inside of other public areas, that's fine, because I'm saying this and just being really clear because I know that there are critics out there who would love to just take this stuff out of context, but it would miss the point of what we're saying here. Under COVID-19, we have allowed, the American people have allowed the government to tell us that we are not essential. Walmart's essential. Amazon is essential. Government officials are essential, but the small business community isn't essential. Schools, going to school in person apparently isn't essential, right? You got to learn through virtual learning, which of course I don't think you can learn very well. I'm not saying that teachers aren't doing their job. I think teachers do a fantastic job. I really do. And I think they really want to get through this, and it's not their fault. It's just politicians that are messing it all up. So moving forward, we need to make sure that we push back on government because we are all essential.